Buongiorno and good morning to everyone. Welcome to the 6th Forum of the European Route of Historic Gardens, which the Uffizi Galleries is pleased to host here in the Vasari Auditorium, which is in fact one of the spaces in the museum that is most original as it was conceived by Giorgio Vasari in in and around 1560. As you can see, looking up, the stucco decorations of the ceiling, but also the volume of this, and looking also at the doorways, this is still a space, not just in the spirit, but also in the form of Giorgio Vasari. And I think this will help us to always be in the right mindset of just not historical gardens, but of history in and by herself. I would like to welcome everybody here in the auditorium, as well as those who follow us online on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, Uffizi TV, and we will be broadcasting the entire event of the day for those who had to stay at home, so do all behave well and keep to your time, especially. It's all going to be a live broadcast throughout the world. And differently from some presidential candidates, we're not doing it via Twitter, so there shouldn't be any technical glitches. We're very proud to see that this association, of which the Boboli Gardens has been members since 2017, since its inception, continues to grow and has been awarded the prestigious status of European Cultural Route of the Council of Europe in 2020. So congratulations to all of you. The work that we all did together made this possible. Now, before I greet individual representatives, I also would like to make my compliments to our gardeners who brought this beautiful bouquet of flowers this morning from the Boboli Gardens. And so, in fact, I see the notes don't foresee any thanks to staff. I suppose this goes at the end of the conference, not the beginning, but I think for this bouquet I already would like to thank our coordinator of the Boboli Gardens, Bianca Maria Landi, and her entire staff of gardeners, as well as also Paola Ruggeri, our architect, who is coordinating who is the curator, in fact, of the patrimony, of the architectural and landscape patrimony of the Boboli Gardens, whereas Bianca, as you know, is the curator of the botanical patrimony of the Boboli Gardens. Now, I would like to greet in particular, although in absence, Stefano Dominioni, the director of the European Institute of Cultural Routes, who will be sending a video, which we'll see in a few seconds. I also transmit the apologies of the governor of Tuscany, Eugenio Gianni, who was called to an important coordination meeting, so he cannot be here this morning, nor in the evening for the gala dinner, but he sends his greetings and his wishes for this conference. But I do, with great pleasure, greet my friend of many years and decades, Carlo Francini, the head of the UNESCO office in the city of Florence, as well as Jaume Dusat, who will be arriving in the afternoon, the president, and Lukasz Przyblak, who is present, the vice president of the European Route of Historic Gardens. And I would also like to thank all the representatives of the member gardens for their enthusiasm in accepting the invitation of the association and the Uffizi Galleries to attend this edition of the forum, and all the speakers of this rich day of the conference, as the program announces. The theme is a diversity of relations between the European historical gardens in the morning, and in the afternoon, historic gardens united in challenge. But the first challenge to overcome now is the video, which we will be seeing with the greeting message by Stefano Dominioni, and I would like to ask to put it online.
Signore e signori, buongiorno. Un caro saluto da Lussemburgo, dal nostro ufficio del Consiglio d'Europa, itinerari culturali. Un grazie per l'invito agli organizzatori del sesto incontro dei giardini storici europei a Firenze, ospiti dei giardini di Boboli e delle gallerie degli Uffizi. I'm very pleased to say a few words of introduction from the headquarters of the Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe program. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, in particular the president and the management of the European Historic Gardens, Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe since 2020, but also the local organizers, in particular the director of the Uffizi Galleries, Elke Schmidt, the president of the Tuscan region, Mr. Gianni, Mr. Francini from the UNESCO office, and of course the president, Jaime Dulsat of the European Historic Garden Association, and the vice presidents, Lucas Pritzbliak, who I met 2 years ago in the framework of the certification ceremony in Lloret de Mar, Spain. It is a pleasure to address your forum, an important forum because of the topic, because of the essential heritage that historic gardens promote across Europe, landscape, but also human intervention, knowledge, art and architecture, and also the beauty of our different landscape at the European level. That is important for European memory, for European history, and for also living together and benefiting from our cultural heritage. The Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe has been a unique program since the 1980s, with the Declaration of Santiago de Compostela launching the program. Today we have enormous success in both certifications of cultural roots. 48 cultural roots have been certified to date by the Council of Europe, many different fields, from art to history to architecture, landscape, the religious heritage and industrial scientific heritage, all kinds of human endeavors that have marked our continent from east to west, from north to south. Council of Europe member states, as you know, 46 member states spanning the entire European continent and beyond. The cultural roots of the Council of Europe program are unique also in their ability to not only trace European heritage among our borders, but also connect worldwide countries that have been contributing and have been also witnessing an important heritage and our linkages with our European history. So we celebrate our diversity, we celebrate our living together, our culture, our dialogue, and the cultural roots are a wonderful opportunity to create these bridges across our different heritages in order to show what is our identity as Europeans, what is our shared European citizenship. So 48 cultural roots, a Council of Europe program that has the support of, to date, 38 member states. Italy, the host country today of your Historic Gardens Forum, is a founding member of the Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe program. I'm very proud to say it as an Italian, but also to recognize the wonderful cultural heritage that Italy has promoted over the centuries, and the cultural roots are a very good testimony of how Italy is also connected to Europe in many historic and cultural ways. Over 30 cultural roots of the Council of Europe crisscross Italy, and we're very glad also to work in cooperation with the Ministries of Culture and Tourism of Italy to promote the program at national level. Italy just had the chairmanship of the Council of Europe last year, and during the chairmanship we organized a number of events that saw the cultural roots of the Council of Europe crossing Italy being promoted and being recognized as an important heritage. But today is a day to celebrate historic gardens. Florence has a wonderful heritage in this field, Tuscany for sure, and Italy as well, but Europe as a whole, with a variety of styles, of traditions, of heritages, and or techniques, and different also landscapes. So I'll leave to the experts today to dwell into this wonderful European heritage. I congratulate the management of the European Route of Historic Gardens and its expansion in the recent years since the certification as a cultural route of the Council of Europe. We have witnessed a wonderful growth of the network Europe-wide, and we look forward to the continued success of the program of the European Route of Historic Gardens, and we look forward to seeing you soon. My best wishes to all the participants from Italy and from other countries that are gathered in Florence today, and best of wishes for your seminar, and I look forward to reading the summary of your work, and to see you soon along the cultural routes of the Council of Europe program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I would now like to call to the podium Carlo Francini, who is the head of the UNESCO office of the city of Florence.
Thank you, Heike. Buongiorno a tutti, grazie davvero. Ci sono anche molti amici, non solo di persone che conosco in Italia, ma che conosco nella rete del patrimonio. It's a great pleasure to stay here with you. We are friends from the World Heritage Connection. I think it's in Italy, but not only in Italy, but England and Spain. It's a great pleasure. Okay, thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's with pleasure and excitement that I join you at the 6th European Forum on Historic Gardens, today as the site manager of the Historic Center of Florence, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today's forum offers us a unique opportunity to exchange ideas, share best practices, and explore innovative approach to the management and preservation of historic gardens. It is a platform for dialogue, collaboration, and inspiration as we collectively strive to ensure the sustainable future of these invaluable treasures. I would like to thank all the heritage professionals, representatives of institutions, and historic gardens manager for being here today. I'm sincerely thankful to the Uffizi galleries for graciously hosting us within their magnificent walls. I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Boboli Gardens for organizing the forum, and this place symbolically depicts the value of the historic gardens for the city of Florence and for the evolution of our understanding of its outstanding universal value that I will dwell on in my speech. Florence, known as the birthplace of the Renaissance, holds a unique place in the annals of history and art. The Historic Center of Florence was inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1982, recognizing its outstanding universal value as a testament to human creativity and ingenuity. Interestingly enough, among the countless monuments cited as criteria to define the Florence universal value, there is a mention of only one garden, Boboli. The same Boboli garden is present in the serial property of Medici Villas and Gardens. There is no doubt that in Florence we are being renominated today for listing as UNESCO World Heritage Site under the same criteria. The concept of nature, landscape, and gardens would have been more pronounced. In recent years, we have witnessed a renewed appreciation for the cultural and historical significance of gardens in heritage sites worldwide. In Florence, too, we have been working tirelessly to recontextualize the universal value of the city, seeking new interpretation of our heritage and bringing to light the available attributes that we are overlooked in 40 years ago. Indeed, as an integral part of the site, the historic gardens help us embrace an holistic approach that considers the interplay between natural and cultural heritage. The positioning of historic gardens on the intersection of nature and art give them a particular relevance in enhancing the outstanding universal value of Florence. The vision of the gardens in relation to the OUV, outstanding universal value, of the site provides not only the opportunity to create networks and itineraries within the historic center, but also to forge connection and relationship between the city center, its outskirts, and minor urban centers. Moreover, this vision helps us to establish a close relationship between two World Heritage sites, the historic center of Florence and the Medici Villas and Gardens, throughout an ongoing dialogue that surpasses formal boundaries. Today, it is obvious that the rhetoric of the cradle of the Renaissance and the narrow notion of historic center must make way for less constrained relationship, which brings us the 2011 UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape. The historic urban landscape view aims to consolidate the presence of culture and heritage in urban policies so that cities focus on their historical, cultural, environmental, and social identities in a dynamic context of values that enhance their uniqueness and universality instead of merely striving to preserve and mandate. In this renewed conceptual framework, the gardens of Florence transcend being mere monumental or stone gardens and become an indispensable attribute of value intimately linked to the community and trust with their stewardship. Closing my speech, I would like to draw your attention on the crucial importance of raising the awareness of the value of heritage. Only citizens, this is a clear indicator of the Convention, the European Convention of Faro, 2005, who are aware of the significance and fragility of the cultural and natural heritage they have inherited will be able to share it with the visitors and the generation to come, with the collective awareness that heritage recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Site belong to all humanity. Let us embrace the notion that historic gardens are not mere vestiges of the past, but vibrant space that can evolve and adapt to the changing needs of our societies. By promoting research, education, and public outreach, we can ensure that these gardens remain cherished events of tranquility, source of inspiration, and living laboratories for future generations. Thank you. A good day in Florence.
Well, thank you very much, Carlo Francini, and I just asked him to take off his glasses because those of you who might not be from Florence might not have noticed before, but he is a true spitting image of Grand Duke Cosimo de' Medici, whose equestrian portrait you see outside on the Piazza della Signoria and in many frescoes here. So I think you're uniquely positioned to head this UNESCO office, considering that Cosimo's wife, Eleonora da Toledo, was the one who purchased the Boboli Gardens.
Oh, okay. the real husband of Eleonora.
Yeah. We'll talk about that later. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ike. I'm a victim of this joke.
Yeah. Well, in Florence, it might be already a running joke, but for those of you who come out from far away, you will notice the similarities. Now, it is my pleasure to call Lukasz Przyblak, the Vice President of the of European Route of Historic Gardens, for the greeting.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to stand in front of you today. And actually, we are meeting today in a place that is not coincidental to the motto of this year's forum. It was here, at the foot of the Apennines, that Leon Battista Alberti, almost 580 years ago, gave birth to the architectural ideas that gave rise to modern European garden art. The Medici court culture, full of splendor and innovation, was also of great importance, strongly inspiring other European courts and thereby contributing to the tightening of cultural ties that are invisible to the naked eye. The stream of Medici artistic expression, engineering, and botanical knowledge has permanently shaped the history and space of many gardens, including several that once are already united in the road of historic gardens. Under the label of the Council of Europe, upholding cultural democracy, equality, and diversity, we form a dynamically growing family of more than 40 gardens. Implementing the main tenets of Council of Europe's cultural policy, we are a living proof that Europeans are exceptional enthusiasts of being united. We find the oasis of this value and the joy of spending time together in the soothing shade of trees, hedges, grottos, and pavilions shaped by the hands of our ancestors. Although we speak different languages and dialects, we wordlessly and almost instinctively point together to the same values written in the historical gardens. They are not only catalysts for cultural understanding and unity, but also the best possible place to hold a neutral discourse on policy and diplomatics. The Boboli Gardens, Gallery degli Uffizi, have contributed to our organization since its foundation. And I would like to thank, on behalf of the board of the European Road of History Gardens, the director of the Uffizi Galleries, Mr. Eike Schmidt, and the unreplaceable caretaker of the place, Bianca Maria Landi, and her team, for the fact that today, in one of the most famous outdoor amphitheaters, a cheer can ring out in honor of a Europe of United Gardens. And with these words, I would like officially, after Mr. Schmidt and my distinguished previous speakers, officially open the 6th Forum on European Historic Gardens. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Now that we're officially open, and I have actually no running jokes on Lukasz Przyblak nor on Bianca Maria Landi, I am handing over the session to Bianca Maria Landi, who will be guiding us through this morning. So, please.
Good morning, everybody, again. Welcome. Dear guests, dear colleagues, and dear friends, just a few words to officially open our 6th Forum of the European Route of Historic Gardens. If our association defines itself a conscious trip to understanding and caring, if our goals are to raise awareness, to encourage collaboration, to develop a relationship, and to promote research, dialogue, and exchange. For all these reasons, we strongly believe in the value of a morning like this one. So it is with great pleasure that we start the morning session of the 6th Forum of the European Route of Historic Gardens on the topic diversity of relations between the European historic gardens, and it's with pleasure that I call here for the first lecture Bruce Adelstein, Coordinator for Graduate Programs and Advanced Research at New York University in Florence, and good friends of Boboli Gardens. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you. Thank you to Director Schmidt, to Bianca Maria Landi, and to Francesca Sborgia and her team for the kind invitation to speak this morning. I should have a PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. So it is a great honor to have been asked to speak on behalf of Boboli. Boboli, which is a garden much larger than what we see in this famous representation, perhaps the best indication of the earliest phase of development of the Boboli Gardens. The Boboli Gardens have, for much of their history, been treated as an act of the patronage of Cosimo I dei Medici, second Duke of Florence and first Grand Duke of Tuscany. But in fact, as I set out to prove in my recent book, the gardens were desired by and created under the patronage of his wife, Eleonora di Toledo, second Duchess of Florence. And this may not seem like an important distinction, but it is, as we shall see, essential to understanding what the function of the Boboli Gardens really were when they were begun, and how they changed over time from what their original intention was into what we know today. Eleonora was a Spanish princess. We do not know with any great certainty when or where she was born. She was likely born in 1522 and very likely born in Villafranca del Bierzo in Spain. Eleonora's public life and her recorded existence really only coincides with her arrival in Italy, probably at around the age of 12, when, together with her mother and two of her siblings, she joined her father in Naples, where he was serving as viceroy. Because Boboli has long been seen as the act of Eleonora's husband, it has been thought of really as a work of Medici patronage and as an essential element in a kind of evolutionary history of Medici Gardens that was also in great part conditioned by what is its most essential image, the lunette that we have just been looking at, attributed to Giusto Utens, but certainly the work of a team of artists working together under this little-known, probably Flemish painter. This series originally comprised 17 elements. They decorated a great hall in one of the Medici villas, the Villa Medici di Artimino, also known as La Ferdinanda, created for Ferdinando I as a hunting lodge. And in this concept, from this fantastic series that provides us with so many extraordinary details for the history of garden culture in general, we see a kind of image of Medici Gardens that is, as I say, evolutionary, kind of Darwinian, starting with the agricultural properties associated with the Medici castle villas at Trebbio and Cafaggiolo, and arriving at the princely garden of Boboli, associated with the seat of an early modern aristocratic court. This story continues in its Medici vein with its exportation on a European scale, which undoubtedly happened due to the desire of Eleonora di Toledo's granddaughter, Maria de' Medici, who, as second Medici Queen of France, during the period of her widowhood and regency for an underage heir, decided that she wished to build a new seat from which to rule in Paris and requested permission from her aunt and uncle, the Grand Duke and Grand Duchess of Tuscany, to send architects from Paris to Florence in order to make drawings of the Pitti Palace and the adjacent Boboli Gardens to replicate them in Paris. And to some extent, we can still see this in the Palais de Luxembourg, the seat of the French Senate, which owes so much to Amanati's garden facade, the great cortile d'onore of the Pitti Palace. Indeed, during its fabrication, people who were intimate with Maria referred to her project as a Parisian Pitti. But the origins of the Boboli Gardens are not really to be found in contemporary and previous Medici gardens. They are to be found in Naples, where, as I said, Eleonora's father arrived in 1532 to serve as viceroy for Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, Charles V. This was an important post. Naples at the time was the third largest city in Europe, superseded only by Paris and Istanbul. It was a great prize for Pedro, who was a cadet of the House of Alba, and so not destined to inherit a title. And he invested a great amount of energy into transforming the position of Viceroy of Naples into something very close to that. Pedro was an extraordinary a patron of architecture and landscape architecture. He was committed to urban renewal, which Naples badly needed, and Naples, even as we know it today, was in many ways conditioned by works begun by Pedro de Toledo. The Quartieri Spagnoli were created by him. The central thoroughfare of historic Naples, which is Via Toledo, is named after him. And Pedro was indeed also a great patron of both villas and gardens. In 1538, something extraordinary happened. Just outside the city of Naples, at the adjacent city of Pozzuoli. After a series of tremors, Pozzuoli was devastated by a great earthquake. This earthquake caused a reforming of the entire center of the city of Pozzuoli, destroying the architecture of its inhabited areas and causing the emergence of a new hill known as the Monte Nuovo, or the Monte di Cenere. Pedro, in order to rebuild this quickly, decided on an interesting strategy. This phenomenon was reported immediately by chroniclers and eyewitnesses, and it was a famous fact and remains so throughout the 16th century, not only in Naples. Reports about what had happened in Pozzuoli in 1538 for the reshaping of its geological formation and the destruction of its urban center were eagerly read throughout Europe. Pedro, in order to rebuild the center of the city quickly, adopted an interesting strategy. He decided to restore what was now a partially destroyed 15th century hunting lodge for the Aragonese and to enclose and add to it a large garden. This was a fast way to rebuild the center of the city of Pozzuoli, but more importantly, it was a very important way to provide for new exigencies. Pozzuoli, which had been famous throughout antiquity and through all of the Middle Ages for the healthful qualities of its waters, following the earthquake of 1538, experienced something new: drought. And along with drought, it experienced famine. What Pedro planted in his garden attached to his palace at Pozzuoli, known as the Palazzo della Starza, and the gardens were known as the Horti Toledani, was in fact not a formal garden. It was a working farm in the heart of an urban center. He planted grain and grapevines, and he brought fresh water sources to the garden, both for agricultural purpose and to supply water to spectacular fountains. This water was then transported beyond the confines of the garden walls to serve the needs of a public through a public outlet, which in fact we can see right here in this later view. Unfortunately, what Pedro developed at Pozzuoli was largely destroyed again by an earthquake. In 1980, the devastating earthquake that destroyed Irpinia and other parts of southern Italy laid waste to what remained by that date of Pedro's construction in Pozzuoli. And I do like to say that they have rebuilt in Pozzuoli, so not to leave you with this image of destruction, but what remained to be rebuilt at Pozzuoli was really only a very small fragment of the original constructed architecture, and none of the original gardens survive. The building now serves as a community center and public library in the heart of Pozzuoli. The destruction, however, in 1980 led to plans being taken of what remained of the ruins. And this permitted recently Dario Donetti to identify 4 drawings in the collections of the Uffizi that had never been convincingly identified with the project before as working projects by the sculptor and architect Francesco da Sangallo for the creation of Pedro's palace in the Pozzuoli complex of 1538. And this has an extraordinary significance for us because 1538 is when the young Cosimo de' Medici entered into negotiations with Pedro de Toledo in order to obtain the hand of Eleonora de Toledo as his bride. We may now see that what Francesco da Sangallo was doing in Naples was part of diplomatic efforts associated with the negotiations for the marriage. Cosimo, in these early years of his reign, struggled to justify his legitimacy. He descended patrilineally from the wrong side of the Medici family, and only through his mother did he descend from the main branch. But he gave great emphasis to that in his artistic patronage to suggest that he was a worthy heir to the traditions of Lorenzo the Magnificent. And in fact, Lorenzo, during his lifetime, had sent Francesco's father, the sculptor and architect Giuliano da Sangallo, to Naples with a project for a palace that was never constructed for the then king. The obvious emulation of this project was meant to suggest both Cosimo's worthiness, the prestige of the Medici, the long-standing relationships between the Medici and the ruling house in Naples, and Cosimo's worthiness to obtain Eleonora's hand as his bride. Cosimo, furthermore, had been in Naples. He had come in the winter of 1535-1536, when Charles V, triumphant in the Battle of Tunis, returned through Italy, making a triumphal progress from south to north and spending most of the winter in Naples. Every small power in Naples, in Italy, who owed their title or prestige to the support of the emperor, journeyed to Naples in order to pay homage to him. And among these was the first Duke of Florence, Alessandro. In his train was a page who was Cosimo, the future Cosimo I dei Medici. And during the ceremonies that accompanied Alessandro's betrothal to his bride, who was the illegitimate daughter of Charles V, Margaret of Austria, known also as Margaret of Parma, Pozzuoli was conferred upon him as a kind of benefice. And it may well be that Cosimo's own personal interest in the project later on was determined by an idea that he too might also become the proprietor of this prestigious appendix to Naples. Cosimo was in any case deeply influenced by Pedro's projects, and at just around the same time he began the patronage of his own garden at Castello. Castello was also intended to serve as a collecting point for fresh water that was intended to be brought on to the city of Florence to supply water to its first public outlet, which never was realized because of the difficulties associated with the great distance between the gardens of the villa at Castello and the urban heart of Florence. Indeed, Cosimo's interest in Pedro's projects has long been recognized, and the building that we are currently in has been identified as depending upon the model of Pedro's example in simplifying the bureaucracy of justice in Naples by reuniting all of the various branches of the justice system in a renovated Castel Capuano. At the gardens at Castello, sculpture confirmed that water was the essential theme of the gardens, and Cosimo's role in wresting new water sources from the ground was allegorized through this monumental statue of Hercules and Antaeus. Eleonora, too, remembered Pozzuoli. When she arrived in Florence, shortly after she arrived, the family moved into the Palazzo Vecchio, making it the seat of the court. And all of the earliest decorations that were made in the palace for the use of the new Duke and Duchess were made in Eleonora's apartment. The very first room to be renovated was her audience hall, known as the Camera Verde. And this room is characterized today by the grotesque decorations of its ceiling, but when it was painted, those grotesque decorations were also complemented by landscape views on the walls. This rendered the Duchess's audience hall a kind of virtual loggia, like the airy loggias of her father's villa at Pozzuoli. And Pozzuoli is not irrelevant in this story, because later in the Lives, Vasari tells us that the only really important models for grotesques were to be found in Rome, and those that were not in Rome were located in Pozzuoli. Eleonora's interest in the project remained throughout the years that she served as Duchess in Florence, and she sent prestigious gifts to her father. She sent 10 glazed terracotta heads to adorn the loggia at Pozzuoli, made by Santi Buglioni and Lorenzo Marignoli, the heirs to the Della Robbia workshop, again in emulation of a famous gift that was made by Lorenzo the Magnificent to adorn the gardens at Poggioreale, belonging to the Aragonese king. And Poggioreale is, I should say, the model for all of these gardens that serve as collecting points for fresh water, which is displayed in spectacular ways through fountains before being carried beyond the garden walls to serve the needs of the populace. By far the most important gift made by Eleonora di Toledo to her father's garden at Pozzuoli was this spectacular sculpture by Pierino da Vinci, now in the Louvre, recently seen here in Florence, for the exhibition dedicated to Eleonora di Toledo. This work was long known to have been sent by Eleonora as a gift for a Neapolitan garden, but the identity of the garden was misidentified by Vasari in the Lives as being that of her brother Garcia at Chiaia. Scholars working recently on this from different sources were able to reconstruct that this was indeed sent to Pozzuoli, where it is represented in a famous manuscript from the National Library in Naples, which confirms that although Pierino conceived this statue to be seen from 360 degrees, once it arrived in Naples, it was inserted in a niche. Boboli then depends precisely on this model. Boboli is a garden that occupies a large area of a densely inhabited urban center, and it serves first and foremost in Eleonora's conception for it as a collecting point for water that was indeed transported beyond the confines of the walls of the garden to serve the needs of the populace in the first public outlet for water ever created in Florence. And additionally, it was, like her father's Starza, a working farm. The very first plants that are planted in the Boboli gardens are grain and grapevines. So the fundamental underlying decisions about what the Boboli gardens were not essentially aesthetic. They were functional, and they were intended to ensure and guarantee both supplies of water and food. The water, as I say, was indeed carried on to just outside the doors of the room we are currently in to serve the Neptune fountain. Florence comes late to the provision of a public fountain for the needs of its people, a very complex project that had a long gestation and was ultimately realized by Bartolomeo Amanati, who became Eleonora's architect for the expansion of the Pitti Palace as well. Ultimately, Boboli's waters were insufficient to supply the needs of the fountain for the great spectacularization of the display of water that was intended for it. And both Eleonora's husband, following her death, and then her son, Ferdinando, were required to tap new water sources. Eventually, 3 water supplies converged on the fountain, on the Neptune fountain, to ensure that its jets would be spectacular and induce amazement in viewers. Boboli's waters were also intended to serve fountains inside the palace. The grandest of these fountain projects was never erected in the Palazzo Vecchio. It is now in the Bargello Museum, and it is also an allegorization of the resting of new water sources from the ground. The iconography, as we can see, is very different from that was created for Cosimo's garden. No longer the male ruler, allegorized as a kind of Hercules. The focus in this fountain is on female goddesses: Juno, the queen of the gods of the Olympian divinities, and Ceres, a harvest goddess. These allude to Eleonora's personal fertility, her role as the founder of a new dynasty, but also to the fertility of her lands. Eleonora was the single Medici consort with the greatest responsibility for expanding Medici landholdings in Tuscany. And she ruled over these lands. She was at the apex of a great system that ensured the agriculture of Tuscany and grain supplies to the city of Florence. This fountain was ultimately erected in the Boboli Gardens and can just be seen in Uten's lunette. This focus in the Boboli Gardens, however, on food and water made it the ideal place for the invention of what was a new type of sculpture in Europe. The very first genre sculpture in European history following the fall of the Roman Empire was created for Eleonora di Toledo to adorn one of the water elements in her garden. And it shows us an idealized peasant engaged in an everyday activity wearing contemporary clothing. The peasant, as could be seen in his recent display in the exhibition of Eleonora di Toledo and the invention of the Medici court in Florence at the Pitti Palace, is fitted out with all of the things that he needs to engage in farming activities, including the pruning hook that is essential for his work on grapevines. And we can actually tell you exactly what kind of wine he's producing from his barrel. The smaller cask was reserved for the vinification of muscatel. And indeed, on the very first page of Eleonora's accounts documenting plants installed in the gardens, we find moscadegli. Boboli thus tells us an extraordinary story about a remarkable creation of landscape architecture, but it also provides important lessons for issues that remain essential to us today about the provision of healthy food and clean drinking water. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for this interesting and deep travel through the origins of Boboli Gardens, and thank you too for respecting your 20 minutes. We kindly ask you to respect your schedule time. As you can see, we have a very deep program with a lot of interesting letters, so we are sure that we can count on the collaboration of everyone. So we keep on going with the second lecture, and I'm pleased to call to the stage Chris Blandford, President of the World Heritage UK, for a lecture on protection of historic parks and gardens in England, the role of the Garden Trust. Thank you, Chris.
It's a little early in the morning for wine, but nevertheless. I am very honored to be here this morning, and just quickly by way of introduction, I have the great honor to be Vice Chair of the UK Gardens Trust, which is why I'm here, but I'm also President of World Heritage UK, so I wear two hats that often overlap, as Carlo said earlier. A lot to get through, but I will do my best. First of all, to say that the UK Gardens are not yet members of the route, but maybe they will be, and I think part of the reason I was invited here was to try to encourage some of our UK gardens to become so. There are many historic gardens in the UK, and they are influenced and have evolved through a great variety of styles, and I just want to talk about two things this morning. One is that mix of styles and the result that has happened over 2,000 years, and then I'll move on quickly to some thoughts about the Gardens Trust and what they do in the UK. Okay. So, there is a huge variety of types of historic gardens in the UK. There are 1,600 on the current list or register, and there's probably another 800 to add to that. And they have evolved from all of these different periods that you can see there on the screen. And I'm quickly going to take you through some of those periods, just so that we can get a feel for how much influence there has been from the context, the environmental political context, excuse me, and how much, as it were, continuing changing through rejection of different styles has happened over the years. The Romans, of course, had their villas, and we have one or two reconstructions. This one is in Somerset. The Romans were really more interested in functional gardens than anything else, growing of vegetables and fruit. But their courtyards, of course, within the villas were the beginnings of more enclosed and recreational spaces. In the following the Romans, the Anglo-Saxon period, of course, there is very little left in the landscape today. There are deer parks, which were allocated to the nobles following the Norman conquest in the UK. But by the time we get to the medieval period, pleasure gardens were very much coming to the fore. So they were quite formal, often centered on a fountain representing life and giving, always enclosed, and were places for music and love and relaxation, particularly for the elite part of society. The country house and gardens and parks of the 16th century were very formal. This is a reconstruction of Kenilworth Castle, and you can see there is already an influence from the European styles, the formality, the sculptures, in this case an aviary. And they were, again, gardens for the elite to make statements about power, but outside of that was the wild landscape that the elite did not want to know about. By the time we got to the 17th and 18th century, the grand manor was very much an influence of what was happening in Europe. But in the UK, it was a time of turbulence, civil war, and everything was quite puritanical. But by the 1700s, there was a new exuberance. Everybody wanted to express themselves as being more aesthetic than functional, and wanted to emulate the classical landscapes they had seen on the Grand Tour, and very much, and in particular, the French Baroque style. So these formality gardens were big statements. House and garden was designed as one. The geometry was about the two representing each other. Canals, avenues, everything in a grand form. Versailles, Vaux de Vicomte sort of thing comes to mind. And as part of that, actually, and indeed as a reaction to that, in the UK at least, the picturesque movement and the gardens that went with it, this is Stour Head in Wiltshire, actually was a rejection of the formality. So in the manner of a series of pictures is how they're described, the sublime experience. And they too were influenced by Europe. So Claude Lorrain and others who were painting classically, these series of views, sequence of views in this garden at Stour Head and others like it, were very much a reflection of that. And more than anything else, I think, in people's minds when they think of historic gardens in the UK is, of course, the landscape parklands, the result of Capability Brown and many others, who threw away the formality, swept it away, and created rolling, undulating grasslands, strategic tree planting, and serpentine lakes. But within the framework of these gardens, there was still a certain amount of formality. So this one is Stowe in Buckinghamshire. You can see the Bridgman plan on the right. If you were on the ground, you would be sensing the lake, the serpentine lake, the undulations of the landscape. But actually, if you were flying a drone above it, then you would see that formality still exists. And these were major operations. And another important name, Humphrey Repton, used his famous red books to convince his clients that it was worth changing his landscape from that you see on the left to, on your left to the right, using flaps of paper in the famous red book. So you lifted the flap and you could see the before and after. So he was well ahead of his time, and computer-generated images would have been something he would really have enjoyed. The point was that he was proposing things that his clients would never see. They wouldn't live long enough. So this was a way of demonstrating that these people who were creating these gardens for the elite were very convincing, and in the sense of getting clients to spend a lot of money. These types of landscapes are now very common across the UK, and there are lots of survivals, and many of them are on the listed gardens list. But reaction yet again, so a lot of people felt that the Brownian landscapes were dull, and the Regency period, 1790s to 1840s, the Georgian period, if you like, a time of social change, lots of poverty emerging in the cities, but there was an appetite for colour and decoration. So you see the reintroduction around the historic buildings, more what we would recognise today as gardens with a lot of planting and colour. Yes, within the parklands, but very much a change in style. And many of these survive across the UK too. So I'm aware, by the way, we're rushing through history here, but we can... And we reached the Victorians, who were very formal in their minds anyway, the context now, of course, Industrial Revolution is well underway. It's all about innovation, change, machines. There was a huge outpouring of explorers around the empire collecting plants. Botanic gardens in Kew and Edinburgh all started to emerge. And there was an emerging obsession for gardening within what was an emerging middle class in the UK. And so there was, once again, a strong reaction to the naturalistic planting and the parklands I mentioned earlier, and a return to formality. So we're going round, in a way, like a circle. But we're on a modest scale now. The Grand Manor is not what we're seeing here. We're seeing things in a much smaller scale. And at the same time, the Victorians began to get a conscience about what they were creating in urban areas, and Victorian parks, and many of the parks, historic parks in the UK, are called Victoria Park. It was a response to overcrowding in the urban areas, and many of these parks still exist today and are on the historic parks list. As I said, the Victorians were great plant collectors, so the introduction of conifers, rhododendrons, camellias, and big displays of these in the historic houses was something that was very much a part of the Victorian style. It's interesting to note that there are only 1,500 native plant species in the UK, but there are 400,000 introductions today, and that grew from this time. So 75% of planting in UK gardens is introduction. So themed collections, arboretums, and so on were all very much part of this. If we move on a little further, we see, in a way, another reaction. The arts and crafts movement was common across Europe. It was quite late in the UK, so early in the UK, around about 1870. The promoters of this, people like Ruskin and Morris, wanted to react against machine production. So domestic scale use of local materials in gardens, local vernacular, naturalistic planting were all things that emerged. In many ways, this wasn't a garden style, it was a philosophy. And of course, it's reflected in painting and all of the other arts as well. This particular one is Hidcote in Gloucestershire, a National Trust garden. And then if we leap forward into the 20th century, of course, we see yet another style happening. And all of a sudden, we're in the post-war optimism period of the 1950s through to the 60s, where landscapes of another sort became of great interest and have now finished up on historic designed landscape lists. And the emergence of the landscape architectural profession came through very strongly from 1970 onwards. I was one myself at that time. There were 500 of us in the UK. There are now 5,000 registered landscape architects. So they were concentrating on creating public spaces, some of which have become listed as historic spaces. The garden designers, who were the complementary teams working in a way separately to landscape architects, the formal professional landscape architects, worked on garden design. This is Hemel Hempstead by Jellicoe, built in 1962, and represents, as I said, the institutional landscapes. And as we move into the 21st century, the first park to be built of a major sort in Britain was the Olympic Park in 2012. And it very much represents this huge emergence of concern for regeneration of cities and the provision of public realm and the quality of public realm, very much a design exercise more than anything else. And it's this really that started the historic landscape lists to include cemeteries and memorials and campuses and all sorts of other things. So in the UK, our historic register includes a lot of 21st century places. And our domestic gardens, of course, the Brits are absolutely obsessed with gardening. And so the modern gardens today, no doubt, will be on the list tomorrow. I'll freely admit this is my own garden of 10 acres. I'm not saying it'll be on the list, but nevertheless, I'm obsessed as everybody else is. Right, so I don't want to spend too long on this because it's quite boring stuff, but just to quickly show you where the Gardens Trust sits in relation to heritage protection in the UK. The orange colour there is the Department of Culture, Media and Sports, DCMS, and the blue is the Planning Department. The Gardens Trust is an NGO. It provides statutory consultee services to government for historic gardens on the registered list, and it provides services to the planning streams, the planning authorities who are responsible for controlling development. And in terms of designation of now what I'm calling designed landscapes rather than historic parks and gardens, it happens nationally through the registered parks and gardens list that I referred to in the green there, you can see, and through the scheduled monuments, so there's an overlap. And it happens regionally by local authorities providing historic environment records and actually designating more localized sites. Inevitably, there is overlap, so other statutory protections like listed buildings, conservation areas, national parks, all have within them historic parks and gardens. So it starts to get quite complicated. And as I've emphasized as I've gone along, we're not talking only about gardens and parks, we're talking about this range of things that you can see on this slide. And whilst the registered gardens, historic gardens list, as I said, has 1,600 sites on it, there are probably another third or another 800 yet to be recorded and protected. The list itself was a result of the 1983 National Heritage Act. It's managed by Historic England, and the Gardens Trust assists them in that by providing services, detailed services of an expert sort, and planning services to assess the impact of planning applications. And the sites themselves on that list of 1,600 are graded according to their significance, and you can see there the grades and the relationship. 10% are the most important internationally, and quite a number of those overlap with World Heritage sites. As I've said, there is a great deal of a journey to go yet to make sure that we've got all of our sites properly covered. Again, the reason that the Gardens Trust is in evidence is because, like everywhere else here, I'm sure in Italy it's the same thing, there are a whole range of impacts that are constantly needing management. I'm not going to go through them, you can read them for yourself. But it is a constant challenge to the Gardens Trust and other NGOs to try to deal with the impact of development on historic places. Gardens Trust is a charity. It has about 1,200 members. What's important is it is an umbrella over 37 local Gardens Trusts. So we in the Gardens Trust provide not only advice to government, but at the local level, we provide detailed advice to these county Gardens Trusts. And how are we funded? In part by government and in part by membership. But of course, like every other organization of this sort, one of our priorities at the moment, of course, is to increase the amount of funding so we can carry on undertaking the core activities that you see listed there under committees. So as I said, the umbrella of the Gardens Trust is affiliated with a whole range of other local Gardens Trusts. We call them the County Gardens Trust, or the CGTs. So what does the Gardens Trust do? It, as I said, it does a lot of planning work. It has a lot of time and energy into engagement and volunteer support, very much supported by volunteers, and a lot of research and recording goes on to underpin the planning work. Again, I'm not going to take you through this in too much detail, but this is an important part of the role of the Gardens Trust. And when I said it was a statutory role, government pay for this advice. The Gardens Trust supplies it to government and to local authorities and comments on over 1,700 planning applications a year and provides those comments and evaluations to the local planning authorities who need to take note of that as a material influence on their final decision for a particular planning application. And we provide a lot of advocacy work to try to influence government. Currently, government are going through planning reform, and so working with politicians as best we can and trying to influence the policy, national policy for planning and the national policy for heritage is very much the role of the Gardens Trust. I said that we work with volunteers. We are greatly supported by volunteers, but in return we share knowledge, we advise them on their research and recording at a local level, provide a lot of conferences and events, all of which are promoting the value of designed landscapes, and all of which are about trying to spread the knowledge across all communities of the value of historic gardens and landscapes. And as you would expect for an organization of this sort, the learning activities are very important indeed. It's not just an umbrella with, at a strategic level, it's a lot of research goes on locally in many of the gardens and many of the unlisted gardens so that they can be brought forward for recording and then consideration to be on the list and therefore be better protected. So just to wrap up then, after that rapid run through, I'm already getting the signal from the back, so I know I've overrun. Like every other NGO, we worry about our future, and our business plan promotes caution and not too much investment. We worry about the loss of our core funding from Historic England and what we would do if that was lost. So we are putting fundraising as a high priority. We work hard to build relationships with the 37 gardens trusts, local gardens trusts, but as you can imagine, they are all different, they're all diverse, and they have varying types of relationship with the umbrella. And we have to make sure that our advice is as it should be in terms of capacity and credibility of the knowledge of historic gardens and their values for us to be giving to the planning authorities and others. We are very much a volunteer organization and very over-dependent on that in some ways. So the delivery of our core activities is dependent on that, and we are looking to try to increase our paid staff if the funding can be found. Okay, I think that's it. A real rush through. Thank you very much, and I'm once again very honored to be before you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Our association really looks forward to catch some UK gardens. So we are sure that occasion like this one can contribute to disseminate good seeds in our fields of cooperation and collaboration. So I'm pleased to call Albert Fekete, curator at the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation and director at the Institute of Landscape Architecture, Urban Planning and Garden Art, for a lecture, Hidden Bridges, the Transylvanian Garden Culture in the Light of European Relations. Thank you, Albert.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. It is a huge honor for me to have this lecture in this beautiful and historic environment. Thank you very much for the possibility. As you can read the title of my presentation, I'd like to give you insight in a topic which is related to the general topic of the conference today. It's about the relationships in between gardens of Europe. So the aim would be to tell you a few words about who and how they influenced the development of garden art in Transylvania, which is a region belonging to Romania nowadays, but from geographical point of view, it is part of the Carpathian Basin. And as you can see on the slide, in our institute, we started to lead many researchers related to historic gardens. In this large Carpathian Basin environment, we have already 25 years of experience in this field, in this domain, and actually the slides I will show you today are somehow results of those researchers. A few words about the study period. I propose to give this insight regarding to the 18th and 19th century, because that was the period when the garden art in Transylvania started to become stronger after a long Ottoman invasion, which actually means isolation from political and cultural point of view as well. And during the 18th and 19th century, thanks to those relationships in between aristocratic families and professionals, the garden art started to rise up again. I would like to start with the Baroque, and as you know, that in that period, Transylvania belonged to the Austrian Empire, being under a strong political and artistical influence of the Vienna's court. And the most important example to follow was the imperial court from Vienna and the palais and the garden from Schönbrunn. The main structure of this garden, it is a very typical one from Baroque gardens, with the layout scheme of a goose foot or pot d'oeil. And in case of the Schönbrunn Palais, the main axis of this goose foot alley system was closed by an artistical construction, so-called gloriette, acting as an eye catcher and stopping the gaze at the same time. Coming closer or approaching Transylvania, of course, I have to say a few words about Hungary as well, and most important Hungarian estate related to Baroque, the Esterházy Castle Garden. As far as it was the first one in Hungary and the famous one, and the flowering period of this estate was in the 70s. As you can see on the slide, at the end point of the main axis is another construction, is a church tower located in the neighbor village, actually. It's still existing, this visual connection. And now, starting to talk about Transylvania, I would like to start with an example from Bonshida, where the landlord at that time was Dénes Bánffy, Count Dénes Bánffy, being in a very close relationship with the Empress Maria Theresia, being a kind of chancellor of the Empress, secret advisor, chief horseman. So the family, the Bánffy family, had a very strong economical power background, which is very important from this point of view. This was the basis they could build a Baroque estate with a garden covering about 200 hectares. The design of the park was made by an Austrian gardener, Johann Christian Erras, and the building period was quite short, from 1748 to 1752, which again proved the economical power existing in the background. The structure is the similar one I mentioned before, and you can see that the main axis was closed by a church tower in the neighbor village. The northern axis was closed by a watchtower located in another castle garden, and the southern axis was actually represented by a gloriette, which wasn't built in the 1750s, 1760s. Even the representation of the first military survey missed this building because it was finished later on, and we can observe only on the latest representations. Another example from Transylvania belonged to Count Samuel from Bruckenthal, who was a governor of Transylvania for a long while during the Habsburg Empire. And this was begun to build in 1761. And it has a smaller area covering about 6 hectares. In the development of the park, Bruckenthal used the advices and the design of Johann Eberhard Blaumann, a German architect, urbanist and sculptor at that time. And the ornamental garden was enclosed by a wall, which was a very often used solution in case of the Baroque gardens. It has essentially an orthogonal layout, but from the water feature located in the third of the main axis, away from the castle, a goose foot motif appears, and the paths are running in 5 radial walkways, dividing the southern part of the garden. We have to mention here that the contributing architect, Blaumann, has been involved in other Baroque projects in Transylvania as well, in the Veseliny Castle from Gibault or Banffy Castle from Bonsida, but he mainly worked on the design and decoration of the buildings and was not mentioned as a designer of the gardens anymore at all. The next example is showing another type of Baroque garden with radial axial composition and with application of lawn parterres in between the roads, alleys and pathways of the composition. This is, of course, a very common structure as well of the former gardens, used almost everywhere. And a first example I wanted to show to you on the top right side on my slide. It's about the Abbey from Melk in Austria, designed by Franz Rosenstiengl, who was a painter, actually. Beside the garden design, he painted altar pictures, frescoes in churches, and in 1770s, he became a professor of civil architecture on the Military Academy of Vienna. Rosenstiengl was employed by Count András Károly to redesign the castle garden ensemble from Nagy Károly in Transylvania, and we can see his design in the left side of the slide, which presents many similarities with the design of Melk. In Nagy Károly, another master worked as well. Anton Hillebrand was also employed or contracted by Count András Károly, and his detailed design, as we can see, show a piece of embroidered parterres designed very detailed by him and presenting typical Baroque garden features as follow: triad lineaments alongside of the main alley, bosquets with central elements like sunken ball turf or tapis vert, or an arbor surrounding the garden. Another typical Baroque feature, which also occurred in some Transylvanian Baroque gardens, is the radial walkway or star form promenade. The star promenade is a road system and spatial structure element starting gradually from a prominent center, marked by a building, fountain, water basin, and so on. A nice example of star promenades we can see in the garden of Redei Castle in Erdőszentgyörgy, which presents to us, as we can see on this gravure from the beginning of 19th century, a mixed character. Some formal garden elements can be identified on the gravure, for example, the star-shaped promenade with a fountain in the middle, the geometrical shaped terraces in the hillside in front of the castle, the fence around the garden, but parallelly some new, more natural-like shaped features are also present: the sinuous pathways, the forest in the western part of the garden. This garden in Erdőszentgyörgy was designed by a Belgian gardener, Franz Buret, who served 36 years for the Redei family, and his tombstone is saved in the courtyard of the church to this very day. We have descriptions and depictions of several gardens in Transylvania that present Baroque gardens of a specific layout. I used to call them Baroque gardens of local character, as you can see in this image. Actually, we are talking about a medieval construction. The four towers were demolished and the new Baroque castle was erected. And in the former place, on the former bastions, they created four embroidered parterres using some very local art motifs, which gives a special local character for the site. The German gardener Philipp Haneck, who designed this layout, presented his design to the owner, but Count Teleki wasn't very much delighted about this design, and he wrote, as you can read, to this son at the end of 18th century. The delineation of the garden of Gernyesek does not accord with my objectives, as it is missing any islands or the so-called pond garden, and does not even have a spring, streams, and ponds in the entrenchment. You should make, if you like, for fun, just for fun, one almost brutal delineation which has all of these in it. I wonder why the Count did not like this unique design. The answer is naturally because his progressive spirit doesn't allow to make something very traditional at the end of 18th century, when the new era, the landscape garden era, already started in the western part of Europe. And for the end, I would like to share with you some examples related to landscape garden period to 19th century. First master I would like to present to you is Christian Heinrich Nebien, originally from Lübeck, from Germany. He was very famous in former Hungary, and as you can see on the pictures, he had gardens in nowadays Slovakia, in Hungary. Looking on these pictures, we can realize immediately this large opened pleasure ground in the front of the castle, very typical for the picturesque landscape gardens. And the example from Transylvania is related to the Forrai Nádasdy Castle Garden, which at the moment nowadays belongs to the former Romanian king's family, and it is very well maintained. And looking at the picture, we can see that the same structure, the same huge pleasure ground is appearing in the photo. Related to Nebien, we have to mention that he was the winner of the competition in Budapest, announced design competition for the design of the Városliget, the city park, in 1813, and the park was realized, built afterwards according to his design. Another example, and the master William Clancy, working at the Candefi estate in Uraja Boldogfalva. Here is a technical detail of a pound designed by himself, and some drawings did by the same William Clancy in case of Budapest, the Ellipse Garden located on the hillside of Buda Castle. He was also involved in the redesign of the Népliget park, the second largest park in Budapest. And the last name I would like to mention here is about a French master, Achille Duchesne, member of Gardner dynasty in France. He was invited by Armin Mikes to Zabola to redesign the landscape garden at the beginning of the 20th century, and he did it accordingly to the manner of the beginning of 20th century, and he had already very famous works and contracts in different European locations, and not only. Some aspects related to his design I would like to highlight here: the geometrical shapes of the terraces nearby the castle, and the geometrical shapes even of the lake and the pathways redesigned by Achille Duchesne. To conclude my presentation, I would like to highlight here that, of course, I mentioned a few examples, and you can see here a detail of a very long list of contributors and masters. We have over 100 items and locations where different European masters worked in Transylvania. And probably this is one of the most important reasons why are many similarities in between Transylvanian and European gardens. But the role of aristocratic families, the owners, it's also very, very important, because in many cases the owner itself was the designer. And I think we have to remember them also as a kind of creators of the gardens and of the new heirs coming from Western Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Albert, for your contribute today. And now we ask you to enjoy a short coffee break, and the lectures will start again in 20 minutes. We will restart at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Dear friends, dear all, gentili tutti che ci state seguendo da remoto, I'm pleased to introduce now Nikolaos Thimakis, member of Board of Metropolitan Green SA, National Garden of Athens, Deputy Manager of Balkan Botanic Garden of Krusiahout Demeter from Greece. He's going to speak about the Piconic landscape of Philopappos Hill and other stories of botanical gardens, historical parks and gardens in Greece. An overview with look at the future role in cultural heritage. Welcome, Dr. Thimakis.
Good morning, Kalimera. I don't know, can I start or I have to wait a little? Okay.
Dear guests, please, we ask you to take your seats. We're starting again. Thank you.
Buongiorno, Kalimera, good morning to everyone. I would like to thank the Board of European Route of Historical Parks and Gardens that invite me, accept my presentation, and I'm here today to speak about who is the best influencer in garden design, landscape architecture, the last century in Greece, because we have a short tradition. As Professor Ferekes said before, some countries were under Ottoman occupation for several ages. Greece was under Ottoman occupation around 400 years, so we didn't have Renaissance, and everything we started is after the middle of 19th century. So today we see what's going on in Greece, and the most important person and the influencer to that is an architect. An architect, okay. It was not only an architect, he was also academic, he was also artist, he was also a landscape architect, Demetrios Pikionis. We are going to speak about him, and through him we will see the whole story. I'm coming from Thessaloniki indeed, but I'm a member of a board in our National Garden of Athens, which has also in its management the Philopappos Hill. The Philopappos Hill and is the round of Acropolis indeed. I suppose several of you came to Athens and visit Acropolis. It's an ancient, it's a monumental place, so we are going to discuss about all this and how it comes today and what is the effort we are doing in Greece to improve and proceed these places to a better situation. I don't know. Okay. So some word about Pikionis. We said a Pikionic example. What is the Pikionic example and why do we use this and who is Pikionis? He was born in 1887 in Piraeus. Piraeus is the port of Athens. And he trained as a civil engineer in a short period in Athens, and who started also working as practicing as a painter. And he was not really quite sure what he wanted to do. Then he left Parthenis. Parthenis is a very famous Greek painter. And he went to Munich to study fine arts, and then he decided to go to visit the Kiriko, and he studied next to him and worked next to him, and he became very popular as a painter. In early 1980s, took some training as an architect. He did some courses of architectural composition next to Jules-Léon Chiffaut in Paris, and he returned to Greece, and especially to Athens, based in Athens. And at that age, our Polytechnico was very young. It was a school of about 10 years. It was after the First World War. And he has the opportunity to be a professor in decoration. So now we saw a person that started as a civil engineer, was a painter, was an artist, went to the Kiriko, architectural composition, and now decoration. All this picture is Pikionis. But not only this. We have a lot of surprises. Some important professors of that period, especially to cultural heritage and to preserving monuments, was Anastasios Orlandos. He was a very important professor at the early 20th century in Greece, and he influenced him. He was also his professor, and they worked together after in the Polytechnical School of Athens. And during the 30s, he created his own business outside university, some houses with gardens and some public spaces. The most important for us in Greece is that all this work based on Hellenic nature and the Hellenic tradition. It was not something like Bauhaus or Le Corbusier or something like that. It was something very unique, very has its own identity, the identity of Hellenic tradition. And the most important works was in between 1951 and 1957, the round of Acropolis and Philopapos Hill, very popular work worldwide, I suppose. And then at the final, at almost the end of his life, because he died in 1968, he did a masterpiece, a monumental work that we will see in the next slides, which is the Children's Garden in Philothei, which is unique. It has to do something only for kids and with the eyes of the kids, not the eyes of the adult. It was a very special work. It still is. We could name him as the first Greek landscape architect, which is his example. It's a work of art. Predetermined forms and prevailing architectural modes could not be directly applied. We are going on site, we know what we're going to do at about, and we are doing the work there, finally. It's not all sketched in a plan. It's not all designed. In the middle of the slide, you can see his patterns. He worked like this, with stone, local stone. He worked with local stone. So all these pavements and all these materials worked as a sewage system also, as a drainage, which is very important also because we have heavy showers sometimes in Athens, and we need to have good sewage, good drainage. This is some of his sketches. He worked on hand, of course, and he tried to engage the Hellenic tradition with the Japanese one and maybe the Indian one. What he did, he believed that nations or tribes were engaged to the sea as sailors, navy, had common things. Greece and Japan are the two biggest navy nations in the world. So he believed that he could engage this tradition. And you can see below the way he worked. He worked with his craftsmen together. Sometimes, even he was an architect or a landscape architect, he went down to the site and he worked with a stone with them. Everything was authentic and original, to look like who we really are. Usually, people after some wars or some help had a sense that we want to be in a part of the world, we have to be united with someone else, maybe America, maybe UK, I don't know, maybe Europe. But each country has its identity. Piccionis believed that and put it in his work. We have to have our own model. So we could say that he was working without plans, by self-resilience on the spot. He noted himself as a self-taught, even he had a lot of studies. And finally, we can say that his work is a dialogue with the local landscape and local people. Maybe we can say that he was the first in Greece that did participatory design in somehow at the middle 20th century. In his emblematic work, which I hope that you could come and see if you didn't come until now in Athens, and if you came and you didn't notice, you can come again and notice now better, is that the landscape around Acropolis and Philopapos Hill. So he went there, he worked there for 6 years, and he put his footprint not only as an architect or landscape architect, but as a botanist also, a new dimension we mention now, and environmental and cultural awareness. So, some comments about Acropolis, Promenade and Philopapos Hill. Maybe it's a familiar place. We can see his sketch of the round of Acropolis with a stone. You can imagine that the final result is not exactly like that. He worked the stone ad hoc on site. And the flora of the surrounding area was not exist after the Second World War. He planted by himself and his gardeners there. Outside Acropolis, around Acropolis, there were several cafeterias. And the people who had the cafeterias and the other stores denied to leave. And the Prime Minister by himself go there and said, this person is important, we have the center of the world, we need to do something special. So Piccionis had a political help to do his work. Sometimes it's very important, especially in the modern times, because at the old periods we have the king, we had the queen, and whatever they said, it was a law. When we have democracy, it's a good thing, but sometimes people react. Okay, they have the right to do, of course, but it was very important. Imagine if around Acropolis we had cafeterias, what's going on. So Piccionis proceeded his work with local flora, olive trees, myrtles, laurels, neriums, several herbs, Ceratonia, Siliqua, and other trees, Quercus. We have all these kind of trees, all this promenade. So people will start to rethinking about how a place in Mediterranean region or in Greece could be with local plants and not with commercial plants. He was far in front of his period, and this is the promenade of Philopapos. Look at this. It's a piece of art. It's like, I don't know what to say. It's very complex, but simple at the same time. And this is his sketch here. This sketch has to do with the flora, how he put the flora in between the rocks, the stones, and how the water could go easily and give irrigation, but also go, and not to be lost, to go somewhere else which is useful. Sustainability. And in the hill, in the top of the hill, we have an old Byzantine church. We are not sure. Maybe the Byzantine church fall down after the wars and then rebuilt again. We are not quite sure until now. Agios Dimitrios, Saint Demetrius. Demetrios Piccionis, Demetrius, Saint Demetrius. Okay. Lubadiaris, which is on the top of the hill, he recreated by himself, by his own hands, and with natural stone. But the most important part of it is that during that period, Athens were, after the war, bombs everywhere, ruins everywhere, small houses, and this Prime Minister, Karamanlis, who was also helped him, activate people to build the blocks, the big houses. So they ruin the old houses. And Pikionis started from his house to go to Acropolis to work, and went to every house and took some small material, spare things, maybe not so important. These pieces of material, we call them spolia in ancient Greek language. Spolia, spare, spolia. And he put them in the church. So he reserved the tradition of the old Athens before the war and after the war in this church. Another unique thing that he created is a place that you can stay, sit, even take a small nap, and have Acropolis in front of you as an icon. It's called anapαυτήριον, means the rest kiosk, not the rest house, the rest kiosk. Wood, you can stay there, several people, and you can see Acropolis. It's not for coffee, it's not for playing music, it's something very quiet and peaceful, reminds Zen, reminds tea houses, the same architecture, the same materials, local materials, the rest kiosk. And, in my opinion, his most unique work worldwide is this garden. Children's garden in Philothei. What is this? This is a piece of land outside Athens in a suburb, where it used to be the suburb of bankers, with a lot of water, and people move there to live and then go to their work in Athens. And most of them were young and have children from 6 to 12. He created a garden with the eyes of a child. Everything is in the level of a child. And all the structures and all the games, everything was supposed to be used by children, has to do with Hellenic or Japanese tradition, or something that links them. This small house you can see there, they are from the shepherds of Thessaly, called Sarakatsani, and we called it Sarakatsani Kikaliva. It's very similar to some houses we have in Japan. A big boat in a lake that reminds to the children that we are a nation of sailors and navy. Water everywhere, but he found all the small creeks that were underneath the ground. He revealed them, and put stones, and now we have a completely autonomous irrigation and drainage system without machinery. Some modern icons, and now we have recreation of this place with money of European Union, hopefully. And we will finish this until the end of the year. So we try to find all the stones that are buried, and he used, and we recreate everything to be the same as 1960s. But as I referred before, Pikionis is an influencer about what we are doing in modern Hellenic architecture and gardening or landscaping. So he was the inspiration to proceed after 10 years of work and participations in expos and demonstrate the Hellenic garden and something like that, to take the elements of the ancient Greek and Pikionis and give the term of finally what is the Hellenic garden. Because You all refer to the Roman gardens. We know the English garden, the French garden, all the styles. Do we have a style in Hellas, in Greece? It's strictly Mediterranean or it's something different? For us, it's a brand. It's not only something that it's a garden indeed. It's something that also reaches culture, has to do with the products that go out from the garden. So we give the term 2 years before in Poznan, in a conference in Poznan. It's a concept that became popular in recent years, an established trend in worldwide landscaping, a new style. It's a self-sufficient, sustainable garden, designing with water-wise approach, remember Piccionist, based on Hellenic flora. It is a brand and accession of historical archival records in space of modeling pictures of Hellenic landscape, as Piccionist did. And here is one example. It's not Piccionist. It's in our botanical garden in Thessaloniki, which has created like this, with these rules. So people and schools can come there and we speak to them about what is the Hellenic garden and what is our flora and how we create these gardens and that are sustainable in the future. Thank you so much. So about historic parks and gardens in Greece. There is no specific policy, as you understand. A first attempt is made from our Pan-Hellenic Association of Landscape Architects and Dr. Eleni Athanasiadou to present methodology based on international practice and experience for assessing Greek sites upon their potential to be characterized as historic garden, park, or landscape. A good work from our Landscape Architect Union. And finally, they create a historic Garden Parks and Landscapes team of Greece in November in 2018, and they do a lot of work about that. They do a lot of lobbying about that. As a result, we have 2 gardens as a member. The one is my homeland, it's Nausa. You made it member last year, and the last time you entered the National Botanical Garden, our National Botanical Garden. Hopefully, the next nomination will be Piccionis Children's Garden, which is already a monument. Sorry, I have to return back. I don't know how to do now. Yes, like this. We have also 20 botanical gardens. The most important is outside Thessaloniki, next to Kilkis, which is about all Hellenic flora. We have all the species there, several species of Hellenic flora you can visit. It's only with Hellenic species, which is very important. It's 25 years old. I think after 5 years we can do an application to be a member here. And our proposals for the future, and thank you for giving me 1 more minute, is to found an initiative based on criteria that the Society of Landscape Architects, a special working group named propose, targeting increased visibility on the issues of historic gardens and parks, and ultimately some kind of policy commitment in Greece, which we don't have until now. We have a publication ready about the historic gardens in Greece. Our proposal is around 40. Okay, we need a lot of time to do this, and a strong relations and cooperation between historic and botanical gardens as an environmental awareness for the people, for the young people, to understand what is going on, because we saw countries here like UK, Italy, they have huge tradition, we don't have tradition, and we are trying to establish a tradition. And I said already the conclusions, my acknowledgements, especially also to my good professors from Politecnico di Milano, Professor Giorgio and Palini, who helped me a lot to interfere with that, and all others you can see here. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you very much for your attention and for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Thimakis, for You're not enough. Thank you, Nikolaos, to let us discover Demetrios Piccionis and his influence on gardens and parks in Greece. I'm very glad to introduce now Julia Roman Ketles, professor at the Historic Science and Arts Theory Department at the University of Illes Balears from Spain.
Thank you. Thank you. I must. Wow. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me, and it's a very pleasure to stay here with you. I'm sorry, but I must read because I want to take my time and no more than 20 minutes. Well, you know, we will talk about Mallorcan gardens and specifically about the deep relationship that is established with Italian gardens. I will try to argument that the relationship goes beyond a simple links, like as you can see from the title. In reality, the Italian influence constitutes a basic component in the construction of the historical artist discourse of the Mallorcan gardens. We will exemplify with the exhibitions of two relevant examples, the Russia Gardens and the Park of Miramar. But before that, to grasp the interest of the subject as assess its relevances, I think it is necessary to establish the basic parameters of Mallorcan gardens at a geographical and historical level. I will do it very synthetically. Okay. If you can see at this slide, Mallorca is the biggest of the Balearic Islands. Okay, but the very interest is that it's not no ghost. This is no, I'm sorry, a video. You can see the evolution, but it's not. I'm sorry. The most important thing is the Balearic Islands are located in the western of Mediterranean Sea. And they have been very strategic in trades, in roads, trade roads, and for the political hegemony between different peoples. The situation explains, in part, that one of the first nautical charts, called the Catalan Atlas, was created in 1375 in the city of Mallorca by Abraham and Jafuda Cresques. I'm sorry, because here I can't see the evolution, but it's very interesting. In historical terms, the interest has translated into the succession of different cultures and civilizations. Rome, in 123 before Christ, founded the Palma de Mallorca, the city of Mallorca. At the antiquity, the most important was Rome and Byzantine period. But it was in the medieval period when the most relevant events occur. In 902, the island were incorporated into Al-Andalus, becoming the Eastern Islands of Al-Andalus. In 1229 took place the conquest by the Catalans, so Balearic Islands becoming part of the Aragonese Catalan crown, as well as Naples and Sicily. The medieval period is one of the most transcendent periods in the cultural and artistic development or history of Mallorca. There was two important monuments, like the cathedral or the Castillo de Bellver. I don't know if you can see here these mural paintings that I think, well, evidence these important historical facts. But once the general framework has been established, what we are interested in highlighting is that the garden was an essential component of the culture of the island. The two images help us to visualize what we can deduce from the written sources. In this one, Retaule de Sant Jordi, we can see the orchards. Maybe it's difficult, but here there are a lot of orchards, like orti, l'orti medievale, no? Medieval orti. And the other picture, you can see Ramon Llull, the great philosopher and theologal, no? Where explain his philosophy in the Viridario, at the Verger, no? Viridario. Well, these are the two images that can we understand what was the garden in medieval times at in Mallorca. But at 16th century, the Italian influence entrance through some buildings, some important buildings. One of those was La Llotja de Palma, La Llotja. This was the building of the tradesmen, the important, the comerciantes, no? Mercatores. No? This building is very, very important and is completed with viridario or orti. This is the plain in the 18th century, but this is the plain of the build, and this is the orti, l'Hort de la Llotja. In this orti, you can see the regular, the symmetric traces, no, design, but the very important thing, it was construction with two elements from the Italian garden, the grotto and the fountain. And you can see here the remains of the sculptures from the grotto and the fountains, I'm sorry, Mercury and nymphs. This was a very, very new for the gardens in Mallorca. Sorry. Well, just to, but the most important place where the Italian garden took place, it was in the country properties, out of the city of Mallorca, the rest of the land. And in this territory, there was the country estates of the city aristocracy, okay? And they were the most important source for his rich, And one of those was Russia. Russia is a rustic villa that was formed in 15th century. Is located about 10 kilometers from Palma on the road that leads to the Serra de Tramuntana. As we can see, is a rustico environment dedicated to the cultivation of cereals, oil, and oranges. You can see this white build, the houses for the owners, where the owners spend summers, the summertime. What we see is in part a consequence of the project promoted by Anthony Despuig. This you can see here. Literally, he wanted to build a Palazzo Nobile alla Italiana in the country state. He was the greatest representation of the Enlightenment in Mallorca. Active in all cultural and artistic fields, he was the founder of the School of Nobile Arti, among other things. As a true enlightenment, he shares two passions, the Grand Tour and the passion for antiquity. He made his own Grand Tour through Italy, and you can see this page of the travel diary, when he writes the instructions for planting olive trees according to the Italian method. Why? Because he wanted to increase the quality of Mallorcan oil. And of course, he built a collection, antiquity collection, and created a museum in Russia, the possession, this country estate. But the third, and this is the most interesting, the third aspect that completed the illustrated project was the architectural reform and the formation of the gardens in Russia. The Cardinal entrusted the project to Giovanni Lazzarini, an architect from Lucca, who had trained at the Roman Academy, where they most likely met. In fact, he was hired in the city of Lucca, where he was born and where he developed his professional career. The project is not signed, but it is written in Italian. That's because the attribute is not sure, but probably. The project includes a casino. You can see here the casino, and you know what is the casino. It's built relationship with the garden. and also a garden. This is a detail, the particularity of the design of this garden, with two parts. One, this, a staircase, and the other with parterres and broderies, etc. Only this part with the stairs was built, and you can see nowadays this is this is space, no, with a central monumental staircase culminating in a exedra, this one, with an Apollo, no? And incorporate water and fountains and the muses, the muses with Apollo. Here you can see two details of this creation. It's not the unique at Russia, but it's unique in Mallorca because introduction the iconography. We can read that this garden with Apollo is the memory of the cardinal of the king of the arts, like a king of the arts. But I think this is very interesting because this is a Villa Trevigliana, Bagni di Lucca, where the cardinal goes to take thermal baths, okay? And the Villa Trevigliana, there is this garden with a central stair, and the lions and these fountains are very, very similar that the Russia fountains. And the typology of this garden is from Toscana, because in Mallorca at 18th century there is not gardens like this. Okay, I think this is a very interesting point of the relationship with these models. Finally, this one is Luigi Salvatore from Habsburgo-Lorena, who was the son of Leopold II of Tuscany, the Grand Duke of de la Toscana, no? The Tuscany. And Luigi Salvatore was born at Palazzo Pitti, the origins of gardens, Boboli, no? In 1867, he went to Mallorca for the first time, embarking on his particular grand tour through the Mediterranean. And from 1872, the island became one of his usual residences, along with Trieste and Alexandria. Here you can see Sommerroch, one of the country estates, and the yacht, Nixe, no? With travel along the Mediterranean, and the Die Balearen is the very great encyclopedia of Mallorca, and was financed and promoted by the Archduke. Well, he constructed the park of Miramar. You can see here the painting painting, and you can see this is Miramar and the sea. It's just near the sea at the Serra da Tramuntana. For the romantics are the paradise, because it's selvatic, it's very difficult to see. And, well, abrupt is a natural landscape, is the paradise lost, like this, no? And here, the Archduke construction, the paths and the overviews and everything goes to walking around this park. You can see 2 gardens in this. But the most important item of this park was Saforedada, this geographical accident. No? For this, the Archduke was his very patient. No? And here, just in the place where we can look the biggest, the very well view of the Saforedada, he won't put a classic template, okay? This is Sant Marroig, is the temple of Sant Marroig, like the temple of Diana in the Villa Pallavicini at Genova. No? This was the very voluntad, no? The desire of the Archduke. No? And finally, I can explain about all of my conclusions, but I think the most important is the actual legacy of Archduke is that Miramar became a World Heritage Site nowadays. And, well, that's all. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks to Giulia Roman. We are really happy to discover that Tuscany and Mallorca have such strong relationships. I introduce now Andreina Contessa. She is director of the Historical Museum and Park of the Castle of Miramare and the Friuli Venezia Giulia Regional Department of Museums from Italy, of course.
First of all, thank you to the European Route of Historic Gardens for organizing this meeting, and to Boboli Garden. And I choose to present the Miramare Garden by means of a video that are going to start immediately. So I'm going to speak about a number of statues, copies of ancient statues that are in Miramare Park, and in particular in the upper parterre. A number of statues are located in the area opposite the castle, the parterre, and the castelletto, and creating a sort of outdoor museum, a place of intellectual erudition. Sculpture also have the role of providing verticality to the horizontal composition of the parterre, guiding the eyes and articulating the space. The statues that Maximilian selected must be considered in the framework of the high consideration of ancient art and culture among intellectuals and scholars, promoted in the experience of the Grand Tour. And they must be seen on the background of the discoveries, the collections, and the style of the time. We should remember that in 1830 was inaugurated the King's Museum in Berlin, currently the Altes Museum, that housed the collection of Greek and Roman art, ancient works that used to belong to the Prince Elector of Brandenburg and then to the King of Prussia. The museum was designed by the architect Friedrich Schinkel, and so a figure that was very, very important also for the Park of Miramare. But we are going to put our attention on a little collection of statues that are in the upper parterre, and are two famous copies, Meleager and the Capo Venus, and then we will see the Medicis Venus and Apollinus, and then the Oran. The first couple we find is the Meleager, whose original is in the Vatican Museum, and the Capo Venus, whose original is in the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. And they are very, very famous couple, and we found the same couple in the Carnet design by Moritz Geiss that you can see here. Maximilian hired in Berlin a Berlin-based company of Moritz Geiss, designer and academic artist, that introduced a revolutionary zinc production process, launching the standard manufacturing of statues, decorations, and vases. Extremely renowned at the time, Geiss manufactured works of art created in collaboration with Schinkel, again with sculptors Christian Daniel Rauch and Gottfried Schadow. As melting required a mold. The standard manufacturing of statues made of zinc, casting with a copper processing, resulted into a series of projects that could be selected from a book published in 1863, presenting a large offer of products that includes copies of statues of ancient iron. In this catalog, melted zinc copies of major classic statues played a special role, as in the 19th century, these statues had a very different value that the statues made on the basis of modern design. They were almost exclusively used in gardens of royal castles and royal mansions, where they mostly played a representative role. The purpose seemed to be that of collecting as many ancient works of art as possible as evidence of a classic background. Maximilian was familiar with Geiss' book as a copy in the library of Miramare, And in the State Archive of Trieste, there is a price list of this book with red markings at the site of the selected statues, as well as an accurate comparison of prices with the catalog of Paul & Co. But you can see now the Capua Venus with the original and the drawing in the Carnet and in Miramare, and the stamp of Guy's Berlin on the picture. And also the Meleager and the original, and in the drawing and in the original. It is interesting to note, and this is a particular that is important, but we will see later on. It is interesting to note that a similar choice from this carnet of models was adopted in other gardens in Europe, like